Own It TV presents Approaches to Selling Part 2, working with producers and manufacturers. Commissioning somebody else to manufacture and distribute your own designs can be a daunting prospect. Here, designer Helen Johannesson talks about her journey from making it herself to trusting a producer to manufacture and take her designs to market on a larger scale.
Well, when I set up my business in 2003, the designs that I was working on led me to explore the avenues of manufacturing, and this is partly due to the actual designs and having a repeated thing using a mould. So I don't have the facilities in my workshop to produce hundreds of the same item. So I sourced manufacturing in Stoke-on-Trent initially for smaller batch production. And that means of about using sort of quantities of about 50, 100 per item per order. Sometimes I start off with small production of a product, and this is mainly to test the market, so I can make them in my studio with relatively small outlay. And this is my most recent example of that, which is the Cloud Money Box. So I will produce these in small quantities, show them at a selling show or through my website, and if they are well received, then I can take them to medium range production in Stoke-on-Trent if I want to kind of just keep them sort of small quantities. And then if the uptake is good, then we can take them to China and mass produce them.
Helen's ceramic notepad is an example of one of the pieces that are now manufactured and packaged in China.
I made these about 4 years ago, and I was manufacturing them in the UK. And at the same time, I was showing them in 100% design and at selling shows. And there was a couple of people who picked up on it as a commercially viable product. So they offered me licensing deals. And by that time, I was selling quite large quantities myself, and that was getting quite tricky to have the supplier in Stoke-on-Trent providing enough. So yeah, I sat down with one of these people from Aject Designs, and he has taken it to China, and we've developed it over maybe a year or two with a Chinese factory.
Helen manufactures on a smaller scale in the UK and in Portugal, but still creates space for bespoke or personal projects which are hand-finished in her studio.
This is the butter dish from my very first product range, is that plastic. I produced these in Stoke-on-Trent for, I think, the first 3 or 4 years of its life. And then I also negotiated a license deal with Torsten van Elten, and we currently produce these in Portugal. And they're sort of medium batch produced. And the nice thing about Portugal is that they do colours quite well. So these are the ceramic porcelain birds, which I make in my studio. They are handmade in the sense that they're cast, and then each one is sanded individually to get this sort of smooth finish. So there's a lot more time put into these, and therefore they sort of are directed more towards the high-end sort of selling market, and I will sell less of these because I sell them direct to my customer.
The good news for Helen is that as a creator of three-dimensional works, she's been acquiring rights every day that she's working in her studio, even if she perhaps hasn't been aware of that. So with respect to the three-dimensional works, she has 2 automatic rights that arise. One is an unregistered right in the UK, and one is an unregistered right that applies right the way across Europe. Both these rights are a form of copyright. They're a right to stop other people copying you rather than people just coming up with independent design, but bearing in mind they don't cost anything to acquire, they're very useful rights. In order to prove your right, you will have needed to keep proper records of your work. The idea is that if you wish to challenge someone and say, you've copied me, you'll obviously need to show that the work is your original work and when you created it. It's also possible to strengthen your rights by registering them. The idea of registration is that you are putting your design on a public register, And so an immediate benefit of doing that is that you don't have to prove copying. The law assumes that if something's on a public register, the person who you think has copied has had access to it and seen it. So that's an advantage.
In my licence agreement with Torsten van Elten, we have kept my Yo-Yo brand, and you can see that on the back of all the products. And this is because he actually deals with designers as individuals under his entire brand. So that keeps my Yo-Yo awareness, and it's connected with another brand, another design brand. The ceramic notepad is not Yo-Yo branded at all, and this is also in my agreement that I can continue to sell them despite that they've got Adject written on the back, but they are Helen Johannesson for Adject.
It's important that once you have agreed a licence with your licensee, that as a designer you take stock and actually enter into a licensing agreement. And there's nothing daunting about this. A license agreement will help you and is an investment in your business, because you may have agreed for a 7% royalty on net sales, but how are you actually going to receive that? When are you going to receive it? How is it going to be calculated, etc.? It's useful that all these things are detailed to make sure you get the money. And then if you don't get the money, it's also useful to have an agreement which gives you clear ways of getting out of an agreement or some other way of resolving the problem.
Okay, the reason I branded myself Yo-Yo Ceramics was to detach from my actual name, Helen Johannesson, partly for spelling problems, so people didn't have to spell my surname, but it's also served me as a really good way of establishing my brand, my products. And it's actually evolved now that I sell other people's work on my website. They are people that I've worked for with their designs. So it's quite nice to have that separate from Helen Johannesson. Now, Adject uses my name as I've designed for them, but I also have the ability to go forward with my creative career and use my name as an artist, which was always my intention, to keep that.
Helen has 2 trademarks that she's using in her business: her own name, Helen Johannesson, and Yo-Yo Ceramics. And she hasn't registered those names, so the position at the moment is that she's building up what we call common law rights in them. So she has some rights in those names, but they're not very strong rights. There are 3 good reasons why I would suggest that Helen register both those names. The first is to stop problems happening, or to limit the impact of problems. The trouble with trademarks is that the person who uses them acquires rights in them. Now, under her contract, I expect that it says that it's her name and the other person can't do that. But if it did happen, what she would have is a big argument at the trademark registry, and that's costly. Being useful to disputes is one reason to register rights. The second is Helen is expanding her business, she is licensing. It's much better that she's able to say to a licensee, these are my solid, registered, defined rights. I know that in this territory I have exclusive use of the name Yo-Yo Ceramics in respect of these goods. That's valuable to her, and it's not expensive to acquire that right. The third thing is, at the end of the day, she may want to sell her business. There will be a review of what the assets actually are, and registered rights are very much more valuable than non-registered rights.
I've been in business for 8 years now, and the journey has taken its own shape with the manufacturing, producing in all these different ways. And now I've got my licensing in place. It's a time where I can focus more on the works of one-off pieces for Helen Johannesson. So it's quite an exciting time. So I have 2 or 3 strands to my business still. And that's really important to me, to kind of keep all those different things. So one's very commercial, one's mid-range, and now I can maybe concentrate on one-off pieces, which is very exciting.
For further information on the legal issues mentioned in this film, visit Own It, the only intellectual property advisory service tailored to the needs of businesses in the creative sector.